For privacy reasons, names and places have been changed. This story is inspired by true events.
On Thursday, October 31, 1996, 17-year-old Ashley Marie Patterson vanished without a trace while trick-or-treating with her best friend at the supposedly haunted Whitmore house in Millbrook, Pennsylvania. The drama club member with long blonde hair and bright green eyes had been photographing her elaborate Victorian ghost costume when she disappeared around the back of the abandoned mansion. Despite extensive investigations involving multiple agencies and hundreds of volunteers, no trace of Ashley was ever found. Exactly 1 year later, paranormal investigator Dr. Margaret Thornton discovered a mysterious VHS tape on her doorstep that would finally expose the disturbing truth about what happened on that Halloween night. Thursday, October 31, 1996, began with unseasonably warm weather in the suburban town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, where the crisp autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves and the electric anticipation that always accompanied Halloween night. For 17-year-old Ashley Marie Patterson, this Halloween would represent her last chance to enjoy the holiday traditions of her childhood before graduating high school and moving on to adult responsibilities. Ashley stood 5 feet 4 inches tall with long blonde hair that she often wore in elaborate styles reflecting the latest fashion trends, and bright green eyes that sparkled with mischief and intelligence. She was a senior at Millbrook High School, where she maintained a 3.7 GPA while participating in the drama club, student newspaper, and volunteer work at the local animal shelter. Chapter 1. The Halloween That Never Ended. The Patterson family lived in a well-maintained colonial house on Maple Street, a tree-lined residential area that exemplified the safe, middle-class suburban environment that had attracted them to Millbrook 12 years earlier. Ashley's father, Robert Patterson, worked as an accountant for a regional manufacturing company, while her mother, Linda, was employed as a part-time nurse at Millbrook General Hospital. Ashley's younger brother, Kevin, was a freshman at Millbrook High School and shared his sister's outgoing personality and love of creative activities. The Patterson family was close-knit and active in community events, with both children participating in school activities and volunteer organizations throughout their childhood. Halloween had always been Ashley's favorite holiday, and she had maintained her enthusiasm for the celebration even as many of her peers had moved on to parties and activities they considered more mature. Ashley enjoyed the creativity involved in costume design and the theatrical aspects of Halloween that allowed her to express her dramatic interests. For Halloween 1996, Ashley had spent weeks designing and creating an elaborate Victorian ghost costume that featured vintage-style clothing, period-appropriate accessories, and sophisticated makeup techniques she had learned through her involvement in the school's theater productions. The costume was both beautiful and authentically spooky, reflecting Ashley's attention to detail and creative abilities. Ashley's Halloween plans for 1996 included joining her best friend, Sarah Martinez, for an evening of trick-or-treating in their neighborhood, followed by a small gathering at the home of their classmate Jennifer Walsh. The party was intended to be a nostalgic celebration of their final Halloween as high school students, with about 15 attendees from their social circle. The trick-or-treating route Ashley and Sarah had planned covered the well-established Halloween circuit in their neighborhood, where residents were known for their generous candy distribution and elaborate decorations. The route included approximately 24 houses within a 6-block area centered around Maple Street and the adjacent residential streets. Ashley's parents had given their permission for the evening's activities with the understanding that she would return home by 11 p.m., a reasonable curfew that allowed for both trick-or-treating and attendance at Jennifer's party. The Patterson family had no concerns about Ashley's safety, as Millbrook was a quiet community with virtually no violent crime. The weather on October 31st was perfect for Halloween activities, with temperatures in the mid-60s and clear skies that promised excellent conditions for outdoor activities. The warm weather meant that Ashley's costume would be comfortable throughout the evening and that visibility would be good for walking between houses. Ashley spent the afternoon of October 31st applying her makeup and assembling her Victorian ghost costume, taking care to achieve the pale, ethereal appearance she had envisioned. The costume included a long white dress, vintage-style boots, period jewelry, and carefully applied makeup that created the impression of a beautiful but otherworldly spirit. At 6:30 p.m., Ashley met Sarah Martinez at the Martinez family home on Oak Street, 2 blocks from the Patterson residence. Sarah was dressed as a witch, wearing a traditional black dress and pointed hat that complemented Ashley's more elaborate Victorian costume. The two friends planned to begin their trick-or-treating at 7 p.m. when most houses would be ready to receive visitors. Linda Patterson spoke with Ashley by phone at 6:45 p.m. to confirm her evening plans and remind her about the 11 p.m. curfew. Ashley seemed excited about the evening's activities and mentioned that she and Sarah were planning to take photographs of their costumes before beginning their trick-or-treating route. The trick-or-treating began promptly at 7 p.m., with Ashley and Sarah following their planned route through the neighborhood. Several residents later recalled seeing the two girls during the early evening hours, noting Ashley's impressive costume and the friends' obvious enjoyment of the Halloween festivities. Mrs. Dorothy Chen, who lived on Elm Street, remembered opening her door to Ashley and Sarah around 7:30 p.m. She was particularly impressed by Ashley's Victorian ghost costume and had commented on the attention to detail and the authentic appearance of the makeup and accessories. However, at approximately 8:15 p.m., Ashley and Sarah encountered a group of their classmates near the intersection of Pine Street and Cedar Avenue. The group included several members of Millbrook High School's football team who were also trick-or-treating, though their activities seemed more focused on socializing than collecting candy. The interaction between Ashley's group and the football players was friendly and typical of teenage social dynamics. However, during the conversation, Ashley mentioned that she wanted to visit the old Whitmore house on the outskirts of the neighborhood, a Victorian mansion that had been abandoned for several years and was rumored to be haunted. The Whitmore house had been a source of local legend and teenage fascination for years. The property had been vacant since the death of its elderly owner in 1994, and the elaborate Victorian architecture combined with its isolated location had made it a focal point for ghost stories and teenage dares. Sarah Martinez later told investigators that she had tried to discourage Ashley from visiting the Whitmore house, pointing out that it was getting late and that they still had several houses to visit on their planned route. However, Ashley had become intrigued by the idea of photographing her Victorian ghost costume at the authentically Victorian mansion. The conversation with the football players had reinforced Ashley's interest in visiting the Whitmore house, as several of them had shared stories about the property's supposed supernatural activity. Ashley's theatrical interests and her elaborate costume had made the idea of visiting the spooky location particularly appealing to her. At approximately 8:30 p.m., Ashley convinced Sarah to accompany her to the Whitmore house for a brief visit and photo opportunity. The mansion was located about 8 blocks from their current location, requiring a walk through a less densely populated area where street lighting was more limited. The Whitmore house sat on a large lot at the end of Sycamore Lane, surrounded by mature trees and overgrown landscaping that had not been maintained since the property became vacant. The house itself was an imposing 3-story Victorian structure with elaborate gingerbread trim, wraparound porches, and architectural details that reflected the craftsmanship of the late 1800s. Ashley and Sarah arrived at the Whitmore property around 8:45 p.m., when twilight was beginning to give way to darkness. Ashley was excited about the opportunity to photograph her costume against the backdrop of the authentic Victorian architecture, and she began posing for pictures that Sarah took using a disposable camera. However, after taking several photographs in front of the house, Ashley expressed interest in exploring the property more thoroughly. Despite Sarah's concerns about trespassing and the approaching darkness, Ashley began walking around the house to examine the architectural details and search for additional photo opportunities. Sarah Martinez would later tell investigators that this was the last time she saw Ashley Patterson alive. When Ashley disappeared around the corner of the house at approximately 9 p.m., Sarah waited several minutes before following, expecting to find her friend examining the building's Victorian details or taking additional photographs. However, when Sarah reached the back of the Whitmore house, Ashley was nowhere to be found. Sarah called Ashley's name repeatedly and searched the immediate area, but received no response. The property's overgrown landscaping and poor lighting made it difficult to conduct a thorough search, and Sarah began to feel increasingly concerned about both Ashley's safety and their own situation. After searching for approximately 15 minutes, Sarah decided to return to the front of the house and wait for Ashley to reappear. However, when Ashley failed to return by 9:30 p.m., Sarah realized that something was seriously wrong and began making her way back to the neighborhood to seek help. Sarah arrived at the Patterson home at 9:50 p.m. and informed Linda and Robert Patterson that Ashley had disappeared from the Whitmore property. The Pattersons immediately contacted the Millbrook Police Department and organized neighborhood volunteers to search for their missing daughter. The investigation into Ashley Patterson's disappearance was about to begin, but already the case was presenting unusual challenges due to the Halloween setting, the abandoned property where she had vanished, and the unusual circumstances surrounding her decision to visit the Whitmore house. The answers to what had happened to Ashley would remain hidden for exactly 1 year, until they appeared in the most unexpected form on the doorstep of someone who made their living investigating the unexplained. Chapter 2. The Search in the Shadows. Friday, November 1, 1996, began with an intensive search effort coordinated by the Millbrook Police Department, involving over 100 volunteers from the community and specialized search teams from surrounding jurisdictions. Detective Michael Rodriguez had been assigned to lead the investigation into Ashley Patterson's disappearance, working closely with state police agencies and FBI specialists who had experience with missing teenager cases. The search focused initially on the Whitmore property and the surrounding area where Ashley had last been seen. The abandoned Victorian mansion and its overgrown grounds presented unique challenges for search teams, as the property contained numerous hiding places, outbuildings, and areas where evidence might be concealed. The Whitmore house itself was a 3-story structure with basement, first floor, second floor, and attic areas that all required systematic examination. The building had been secured with boards over most windows and doors, but investigators found evidence that some of these barriers had been compromised over the years, potentially allowing access to trespassers. K-9 units from the Pennsylvania State Police arrived on Friday morning to assist with tracking Ashley's movements on the property. The dogs picked up Ashley's scent throughout the front and side areas of the house, confirming Sarah Martinez's account of their photographic activities. However, the scent trail became confused in the backyard area, where multiple people had apparently been present at various times. The search of the Whitmore house interior revealed that the property had been accessed by trespassers on multiple occasions since becoming vacant. The investigators found evidence of previous unauthorized entry, including graffiti, empty bottles, and other items left by teenagers who had used the location for parties or exploration. However, the search revealed no immediate evidence of Ashley's presence inside the house or any signs of struggle or violence. The dust and debris on the floors showed footprints from multiple visitors, but forensic analysis would be required to determine if any belonged to Ashley or had been made on Halloween night. The investigation expanded to include detailed interviews with all individuals who had interacted with Ashley on Halloween night. This process included speaking with homeowners who had seen Ashley and Sarah during their trick-or-treating activities, as well as the classmates who had encountered them near Pine Street and Cedar Avenue. The football players who had spoken with Ashley about the Whitmore house were interviewed extensively about their conversation and their knowledge of the property. The investigation revealed that several students had visited the Whitmore house on previous occasions, usually as part of teenage dares or exploration activities. One student, senior Marcus Chen, reported that he had been to the Whitmore property several times with friends and had noticed that some areas of the house were easily accessible despite the boarding. He also mentioned that the property was occasionally used by older teenagers for drinking parties, though he had no knowledge of any such activities on Halloween night. The investigation into Ashley's background revealed a responsible teenager with no history of risky behavior or involvement with dangerous individuals. Her academic record was strong, her relationships with family and friends were stable, and she had no known conflicts that might have motivated someone to harm her. Ashley's social circle was examined thoroughly, with investigators interviewing her classmates, teachers, and acquaintances to identify any potential threats or unusual relationships. The investigation revealed no obvious enemies or individuals who might have wished Ashley harm. However, the investigation did reveal that Ashley had been receiving some unwanted attention from an older student, 18-year-old Derek Walsh, who had been persistently asking her out despite her repeated rejections. Derek was a senior who had transferred to Millbrook High School earlier in the year and had a reputation for aggressive behavior toward female students. Derek Walsh was interviewed on November 2nd about his whereabouts on Halloween night and his relationship with Ashley. He claimed to have been at home watching television and provided his parents as alibis for his activities. However, his parents later admitted that they had gone to bed early and could not definitively account for Derek's whereabouts after 9 p.m. The investigation revealed that Derek had a juvenile record that included arrests for vandalism and disturbing the peace, though he had no previous charges involving violence against women. However, several female students reported that Derek had made them uncomfortable with his attention and comments. Derek consented to a polygraph examination, which produced inconclusive results. While he showed some physiological responses that could indicate deception, the results were not definitive enough to support criminal charges or to eliminate him as a suspect. Meanwhile, the search for Ashley had expanded to include areas throughout Millbrook and surrounding communities. The investigation team had developed theories that Ashley might have been taken from the Whitmore property by someone who had been waiting for an opportunity to approach her. The Halloween setting had created unique challenges for the investigation, as the evening's activities had brought numerous people into the area, including many who were wearing costumes and masks that made identification difficult. Several residents reported seeing suspicious individuals during the evening, but the descriptions were too general to be useful for identification. One potentially significant lead came from Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, no relation to Ashley, who lived on Sycamore Lane near the Whitmore property. She reported seeing a dark-colored van parked on her street around 9 p.m. on Halloween night, though she had not thought it unusual at the time due to the holiday activities. Mrs. Patterson's description of the van was general, but she noted that it had appeared to be older model and had been parked in a location where the driver could observe the Whitmore property without being easily seen. However, she had not noticed the license plate or any identifying features that might help locate the vehicle. The investigation also revealed that the Whitmore property had a history of paranormal investigation activities. Several groups dedicated to studying supernatural phenomena had obtained permission from the property's estate to conduct investigations at the mansion, though no such activities had been scheduled for Halloween night. The paranormal investigation groups had reported various unexplained phenomena at the Whitmore house, including strange sounds, unexplained lights, and equipment malfunctions that they attributed to supernatural activity. However, investigators found no evidence that these reports were connected to Ashley's disappearance. The case attracted significant media attention, with local television stations and newspapers providing extensive coverage of the search efforts and the unusual circumstances of Ashley's disappearance. The Halloween setting and the connection to the reportedly haunted Whitmore house made the story particularly compelling for news outlets. The media coverage generated hundreds of tips from the public, including reported sightings of Ashley and information about suspicious activities in the area. However, most of the tips proved to be false leads or cases of mistaken identity, requiring extensive follow-up investigation without producing meaningful results. As November progressed, the intensive search efforts were gradually scaled back due to the lack of physical evidence and credible leads. However, the investigation remained active, with detectives continuing to pursue any new information that emerged. The Patterson family established a reward fund offering $25,000 for information leading to Ashley's safe return or the arrest of those responsible for her disappearance. The reward was announced during a press conference that was covered by regional media outlets and generated additional tips and leads. However, despite the extensive investigation and community support, no trace of Ashley Patterson was found during the first month after her disappearance. The case was beginning to show signs of becoming a long-term investigation with diminishing prospects for a quick resolution. The answers that everyone was seeking would remain hidden for nearly a year, until they emerged in a form that no one could have anticipated, delivered to someone whose profession involved investigating the unexplained and documenting the impossible. Chapter 3. Following every lead. As winter settled over Millbrook in December 1996, the investigation into Ashley Patterson's disappearance had evolved into a complex case involving multiple law enforcement agencies and extensive community resources. Detective Rodriguez had been working the case full-time for over a month, coordinating with state police, FBI behavioral analysts, and local volunteers who continued searching for any trace of the missing teenager. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit had been consulted to develop a psychological profile of Ashley's probable abductor. The profile suggested that the perpetrator was likely a local individual who was familiar with the Whitbrook area and the Whitmore property specifically. The Halloween timing might have been coincidental, or the perpetrator might have chosen the holiday as cover for his activities. The behavioral analysis indicated that Ashley's abduction had probably been opportunistic rather than carefully planned, given her spontaneous decision to visit the Whitmore house. However, the complete absence of physical evidence suggested that the perpetrator had experience in concealing criminal activities or had been extraordinarily lucky in avoiding detection. The investigation had expanded to include comprehensive background checks on all adult males living within a 5-mile radius of the Whitmore property. This process involved examining criminal histories, employment records, and personal backgrounds for over 200 individuals, though none had emerged as obvious suspects. One individual who had drawn investigative attention was 34-year-old Thomas Mitchell, a maintenance worker who had been employed by the city of Millbrook to board up abandoned properties and maintain municipal buildings. Mitchell had legitimate access to vacant properties throughout the area and would have been familiar with the Whitmore house. Mitchell's background check revealed a history of minor criminal violations, including arrests for public intoxication and disturbing the peace. However, he had no record of violence against women or children, and his employers described him as a reliable worker who performed his duties without problems. Mitchell was interviewed about his activities on Halloween night and his knowledge of the Whitmore property. He claimed to have been at home drinking beer and watching television, though he lived alone and had no witnesses to verify his alibi. However, investigators found no physical evidence connecting him to Ashley's disappearance. The investigation also focused on the paranormal investigation groups that had previously visited the Whitmore property. While no official investigations had been scheduled for Halloween night, detectives theorized that someone connected to these groups might have been at the property during Ashley's visit. The leader of the most active paranormal investigation group was Dr. Margaret Thornton, a 45-year-old retired psychology professor who had founded the Eastern Pennsylvania Paranormal Research Society in 1994. Dr. Thornton's group had conducted several investigations at the Whitmore house and had documented what they claimed were significant supernatural phenomena. Dr. Thornton and her team members were interviewed about their activities and their knowledge of the Whitmore property. The investigation revealed that the group maintained detailed records of their investigations, including photographs, audio recordings, and video documentation of their experiences at various locations. However, Dr. Thornton's group had not been at the Whitmore property on Halloween night, and their members had solid alibis for the time period when Ashley disappeared. Additionally, the group's investigations were conducted with permission from property owners and were documented through official channels. The winter months brought additional challenges to the investigation, as snow and cold weather made outdoor searches more difficult and potentially dangerous. However, Detective Rodriguez organized periodic searches of areas that had been inaccessible during the initial investigation efforts. The expanded searches included examination of wooded areas, abandoned buildings, and remote locations where someone might have taken Ashley or disposed of evidence. However, despite the systematic coverage of hundreds of potential locations, no trace of Ashley or her belongings was discovered. The investigation had also revealed that the Whitmore property was part of a complex estate settlement that had been ongoing since the owner's death in 1994. The legal complications meant that the property had limited supervision and was vulnerable to unauthorized access by trespassers. The estate's attorney, Robert Kim, provided investigators with information about the property's history and the circumstances surrounding its abandonment. The investigation revealed that several items had been stolen from the house over the years, though no incidents had been reported to police due to the ongoing legal proceedings. As 1997 began, 3 months after Ashley's disappearance, the case had generated over 800 tips from the public and had involved interviews with more than 300 individuals. Despite the extensive effort, no arrests had been made and no definitive evidence had been discovered regarding Ashley's fate. The Patterson family had struggled through their first Christmas without Ashley, dealing with the emotional toll of not knowing whether their daughter was alive or dead. The family had maintained their involvement in the search efforts while also trying to provide stability for Kevin, Ashley's younger brother. The case had received periodic coverage in national media outlets, including television programs dedicated to missing persons cases. The Halloween setting and the connection to paranormal investigation activities made Ashley's story particularly compelling for audiences interested in unexplained phenomena. However, the media attention had not produced any significant breakthroughs in the investigation. Most of the tips generated by television coverage proved to be false leads or cases of mistaken identity, though each required careful follow-up investigation. In March 1997, 5 months after Ashley's disappearance, the investigation received renewed attention when a homeless man found skeletal remains in a wooded area approximately 10 miles from Millbrook. The discovery generated significant media coverage and raised hopes that Ashley's case might finally be resolved. However, forensic analysis revealed that the remains belonged to a different individual entirely and were much older than Ashley's disappearance. The remains were eventually identified as those of a missing person from a case that had been cold for over a decade, though the discovery provided no information about Ashley's fate. The false hope generated by the discovery was particularly difficult for the Patterson family, who had traveled to the scene and waited anxiously for forensic results. The experience reinforced their understanding that the investigation might never provide definitive answers about Ashley's fate. As spring 1997 arrived, 6 months after Ashley's disappearance, the active investigation was being scaled back due to the lack of new leads and the demands of other cases. However, the Millbrook Police Department maintained the case as a high priority and continued to pursue any new information that emerged. The investigation had influenced changes in how the community approached Halloween safety and supervision of teenage activities. Many parents had become more restrictive about their children's Halloween plans, and the Whitmore property had been more securely boarded to prevent future trespassing. The case was about to enter a dormant period with periodic reviews and occasional new leads, but no major breakthroughs. However, the answers that everyone was seeking were being preserved on a technology that was common in 1996, waiting for exactly 1 year to pass before they would appear in the most unexpected location and in the hands of someone who specialized in investigating the unexplained. Chapter 4. The Case Grows Cold. By the summer of 1997, 9 months after Ashley Patterson's disappearance, the investigation had officially transitioned to cold case status. Detective Rodriguez had been reassigned to active cases but continued to review Ashley's file monthly and respond to any new tips or leads that emerged from ongoing media coverage. The Millbrook Police Department had expended significant resources on the investigation, involving dozens of officers and generating over 1,500 pages of reports and documentation. Despite the extensive effort, no arrests had been made and no definitive evidence had been discovered about Ashley's fate. The Patterson family had been forced to confront the possibility that they might never learn what had happened to their daughter. Robert and Linda Patterson had both sought counseling to cope with the uncertainty and grief, while their son Kevin had struggled with depression and anxiety related to his sister's disappearance. The family had established the Ashley Patterson Foundation to support other families dealing with missing persons cases and to advocate for improved law enforcement procedures. The foundation had raised over $40,000 by the summer of 1997, providing assistance to other families and funding continued investigative efforts. Millbrook had been permanently changed by Ashley's disappearance. The close-knit suburban community had lost its sense of security, with parents becoming much more protective of their teenagers and many families reconsidering their participation in Halloween activities. The Whitmore property had been more securely boarded and fenced following Ashley's disappearance, though the improvements had not prevented all unauthorized access. The property remained a focal point for local legends and teenage curiosity, though most parents now strictly forbade their children from visiting the area. The paranormal investigation community had also been affected by Ashley's case. Dr. Margaret Thornton's Eastern Pennsylvania Paranormal Research Society had suspended their investigations at private properties, focusing instead on public locations where proper supervision and safety measures could be maintained. However, Ashley's disappearance had also generated interest among paranormal investigators who theorized that supernatural phenomena might have been involved in her vanishing. Several investigators had requested permission to examine the Whitmore property, though the estate's attorneys had denied all such requests. The case had become part of local folklore, with various theories and explanations being proposed by community members and amateur investigators. Some believed that Ashley had been the victim of conventional criminal activity, while others suggested that her disappearance was connected to the supernatural phenomena reported at the Whitmore house. As Halloween 1997 approached, marking the first anniversary of Ashley's disappearance, the case received renewed media attention. Local television stations and newspapers prepared retrospective coverage, hoping that the anniversary might generate new tips or encourage witnesses to come forward with information. The Patterson family organized a memorial service for Ashley on October 31, 1997, exactly 1 year after her disappearance. The service was held at Millbrook Community Church and was attended by over 300 people, including family members, friends, classmates, and community members who had been affected by Ashley's case. The memorial service included a candlelight vigil and prayers for Ashley's safe return, though many attendees understood that the chances of finding her alive after 1 year were minimal. The service provided an opportunity for the community to come together and remember Ashley while supporting her family. However, the anniversary also brought renewed pain for the Patterson family and served as a reminder that they were no closer to understanding what had happened to their daughter than they had been on the night she disappeared. Dr. Margaret Thornton attended Ashley's memorial service, though she had not personally known the Patterson family before the investigation. Dr. Thornton had been deeply affected by Ashley's case due to her group's previous investigations at the Whitmore property and her understanding of the location's significance. Following the memorial service, Dr. Thornton had returned to her home in nearby Eastwood, a small community approximately 15 miles from Millbrook. Dr. Thornton lived alone in a converted farmhouse that also served as the headquarters for her paranormal research activities. The farmhouse included Dr. Thornton's office, a library of books and research materials related to paranormal phenomena, and equipment storage areas for the specialized devices used during investigations. The property was isolated but accessible, with a long driveway that provided privacy for Dr. Thornton's research activities. Dr. Thornton had established her reputation in the paranormal investigation community through her academic background and her scientific approach to documenting unexplained phenomena. Her investigations were characterized by careful documentation, multiple witness verification, and the use of sophisticated recording equipment. The Eastern Pennsylvania Paranormal Research Society had investigated over 50 locations since its founding in 1994, documenting what Dr. Thornton claimed were authentic examples of supernatural activity. The group's investigations had been featured in several books and magazine articles about paranormal phenomena in Pennsylvania. However, Ashley Patterson's disappearance had created doubt in Dr. Thornton's mind about the safety and appropriateness of paranormal investigations at private properties. The tragedy had made her reconsider the potential risks associated with investigations at locations that might attract unstable individuals or criminal activity. As November 1997 began, Dr. Thornton had been contemplating suspending her paranormal investigation activities entirely. The emotional impact of Ashley's case and the proximity to locations where her group had conducted investigations had made it difficult for Dr. Thornton to continue her research with the same enthusiasm. However, Dr. Thornton was about to receive information that would not only revive her interest in paranormal investigation but would also provide the breakthrough that law enforcement had been seeking for over a year. The truth about Ashley Patterson's fate was about to be revealed in a format that was both technological and mysterious, delivered to someone whose profession involved documenting the unexplained. Chapter 5. The Tape on the Doorstep. November 15, 1997. Exactly 1 year and 15 days after Ashley Patterson vanished from the Whitmore property, Dr. Margaret Thornton was returning to her isolated farmhouse in Eastwood after a weekend conference on paranormal research in Philadelphia. The conference had been emotionally difficult for Dr. Thornton, as several presentations had focused on missing persons cases that might involve supernatural phenomena, inevitably reminding her of Ashley's unsolved disappearance. Dr. Thornton arrived at her home at approximately 8:30 p.m., navigating the long gravel driveway that led to her converted farmhouse. The November evening was cold and overcast, with the bare trees surrounding her property creating an atmosphere that reflected her somber mood following the conference. As Dr. Thornton's headlights illuminated the front porch of her farmhouse, she noticed something unusual on her doorstep. A rectangular object sat prominently in front of her door, clearly visible even in the limited lighting. Dr. Thornton parked her car and approached the porch cautiously, as she rarely received unexpected deliveries at her remote location. The object proved to be a standard VHS videotape in a black plastic case, with no identifying labels or markings visible on the exterior. The tape had been placed carefully on the doormat, positioned so that it would be immediately noticeable to anyone entering the house. There was no accompanying note or explanation for the tape's presence. Dr. Thornton examined the area around her porch for any signs of who might have delivered the tape, but found no footprints, tire tracks, or other evidence of recent visitors. The gravel driveway and surrounding landscaping showed no obvious disturbances, and her motion-activated security lights had not been triggered during her absence. Bringing the tape inside, Dr. Thornton noticed that it felt heavier than a typical blank VHS cassette, suggesting that it contained recorded material. The black plastic case was slightly worn, indicating that the tape had been handled frequently or had been in use for an extended period. Dr. Thornton's farmhouse included a complete audiovisual setup for reviewing and analyzing recordings from her paranormal investigations. Her equipment included professional-grade VHS players, multiple monitors, and digital conversion capabilities for preserving important recordings. After securing her house and ensuring that no one else was present on her property, Dr. Thornton inserted the tape into her VHS player to determine its contents. The tape began playing immediately, revealing that it contained recorded material rather than being blank. The first image that appeared on Dr. Thornton's television screen was a timestamp reading October 31, 96, 9:47 p.m. October 31, 1996, at 9:47 p.m., just minutes before Ashley Patterson was last seen alive. The timestamp was followed by what appeared to be handheld camera footage of the interior of an unfamiliar building. The video quality was grainy and the lighting was poor, but Dr. Thornton could make out wooden floors, deteriorating wallpaper, and architectural details that suggested the footage had been recorded inside an old house. The camera operator was moving through what appeared to be residential rooms, though the identity of the person holding the camera was not revealed. As the tape continued, Dr. Thornton realized that the footage was being recorded inside the Whitmore house on Halloween night 1997. The architectural details visible in the video matched photographs she had seen of the property's interior during her research into its reported paranormal activity. Approximately 3 minutes into the tape, the camera operator approached what appeared to be a basement door. The footage showed the person descending wooden stairs into a cellar area that was illuminated only by the camera's built-in light. The basement appeared to be unfinished, with stone walls and a dirt floor typical of houses built in the late 1800s. Most significantly, the camera revealed that someone was present in the basement. A figure could be seen sitting against the far wall, though the poor lighting and camera quality made it difficult to identify the individual clearly. However, the person appeared to be wearing light-colored clothing that could have been a costume. As the camera moved closer to the figure, Dr. Thornton realized with horror that she was watching footage of Ashley Patterson. The teenager was bound and appeared to be unconscious or in distress, though she was clearly alive at the time the recording was made. The footage continued for several more minutes, documenting what appeared to be Ashley's captivity in the Whitmore house basement. The camera operator never spoke during the recording, but their actions suggested that they were documenting Ashley's condition rather than participating in her captivity. However, the most disturbing aspect of the footage was not what it showed, but what it implied. The timestamp indicated that the recording had been made on Halloween night 1996, when extensive search efforts were being conducted throughout Millbrook. Ashley had been held captive just a few hundred yards from where search teams were actively looking for her. The tape continued for approximately 25 minutes total, with the final segments showing the camera operator leaving the basement area and exiting the Whitmore house. The last image on the tape was the timestamp, October 31, 96, 10:17 p.m., indicating that the entire recording had been made during a 30-minute period on Halloween night. Dr. Thornton immediately contacted the Millbrook Police Department, reporting her discovery and requesting that investigators come to her house immediately to examine the tape. Detective Rodriguez, despite the late hour, agreed to drive to Dr. Thornton's farmhouse to view the footage personally. Detective Rodriguez arrived at Dr. Thornton's home at 10:45 p.m., accompanied by Officer Patricia Chen and evidence technician Sergeant Michael Walsh. The investigators viewed the tape multiple times, confirming that it appeared to show Ashley Patterson in captivity at the Whitmore house on the night of her disappearance. The discovery of the tape provided the first definitive evidence about what had happened to Ashley, though it also raised disturbing questions about who had recorded the footage and why they had waited over a year to provide it to authorities. The tape clearly showed that Ashley had been abducted and held against her will, but it did not reveal the identity of her captor. The investigation team immediately secured Dr. Thornton's property as a potential crime scene and began processing the tape for fingerprints, DNA evidence, and any other forensic information that might identify its source. The VHS cassette was transported to the State Police Laboratory for comprehensive analysis. More importantly, the tape's contents prompted an immediate search of the Whitmore house basement, focusing on areas that might contain additional evidence about Ashley's captivity or subsequent fate. The basement search revealed physical evidence that confirmed Ashley had been held in the location shown in the video. Investigators found rope fibers, fabric fragments, and other materials that were consistent with the restraints and clothing visible in the tape. However, they also discovered evidence suggesting that Ashley was no longer in the basement, raising urgent questions about what had happened to her after the video was recorded. The forensic analysis of the tape revealed that it had been recorded using a handheld camcorder that was commonly available in 1996. However, the recording device had not been recovered, and investigators could not determine who had operated the camera or created the recording. More disturbing was the discovery of additional footage on the tape that Dr. Thornton had not initially noticed. Hidden after several minutes of blank recording at the end of the primary footage was a second segment that appeared to have been recorded several days later, based on changes in lighting and Ashley's condition. The second segment showed Ashley in an increasingly deteriorated state, suggesting that she had been held captive for an extended period after Halloween night. The footage indicated that her captor had continued to document her captivity, creating a horrifying record of her suffering. However, the final segment of the tape contained the most shocking revelation. The camera operator had recorded themselves disposing of Ashley's body in a remote wooded area that investigators were eventually able to identify as a location approximately 15 miles from Millbrook. The footage showed the perpetrator burying Ashley's remains in a carefully concealed grave that had been dug in advance, suggesting that her murder had been planned rather than impulsive. The video provided investigators with exact coordinates for recovering Ashley's body and gathering additional forensic evidence. The recovery operation at the burial site confirmed the tape's accuracy. Ashley's remains were found exactly where the video had indicated, along with personal items and evidence that corroborated the circumstances of her death. The forensic analysis confirmed that Ashley had been murdered approximately 1 week after her abduction. However, the identity of Ashley's killer remained a mystery. The tape had been recorded from the perpetrator's perspective, but the camera operator had been careful never to show their face or provide any identifying information. The footage provided evidence of the crime, but not the identity of the criminal. The investigation focused on analyzing every detail of the tape for clues about the perpetrator's identity. Voice analysis specialists examined background sounds, technical experts analyzed the camera equipment and recording techniques, and behavioral analysts studied the perpetrator's actions for psychological insights. The breakthrough came when investigators noticed a reflection in a basement window that briefly showed part of the camera operator's hand. The reflection revealed a distinctive tattoo that was clear enough to be matched against police databases and medical records. The tattoo was identified as belonging to Derek Walsh, the 18-year-old student who had been a person of interest during the original investigation due to his unwanted attention toward Ashley. Walsh had been interviewed early in the investigation but had been eliminated as a suspect based on his parents' alibi statements. However, the new evidence prompted a re-examination of Walsh's alibi, which revealed that his parents had been mistaken about his whereabouts on Halloween night. Walsh had actually left home after his parents went to bed and had not returned until the early morning hours of November 1st. Walsh was arrested on November 18, 1997, and charged with kidnapping and murder in connection with Ashley's death. When confronted with the video evidence, he eventually confessed to abducting Ashley from the Whitmore property and holding her captive in the basement before ultimately killing her. Walsh's confession revealed that he had been obsessed with Ashley and had followed her to the Whitmore house on Halloween night. He had used his knowledge of the property's layout to capture her when she was separated from Sarah Martinez, taking advantage of the isolated location and the darkness. The confession also revealed that Walsh had recorded the video as a way to relive and document his crime. However, he claimed that he had not intended to provide the tape to authorities and could not explain how it had ended up on Dr. Thornton's doorstep. This mystery was eventually solved when Walsh's younger brother, 16-year-old Michael Walsh, came forward to admit that he had discovered the tape among Derek's possessions and had anonymously delivered it to Dr. Thornton. Michael had chosen Dr. Thornton because of her connection to paranormal investigations at the Whitmore house, believing that she would ensure the tape reached law enforcement. Michael Walsh's decision to provide the tape to authorities had been motivated by his guilt over his brother's crimes and his desire to provide closure for the Patterson family. He had waited over a year to act because of his fear of his brother and his uncertainty about how to handle the situation. Derek Walsh was ultimately convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The video evidence had provided prosecutors with an unprecedented level of detail about the crime, making the conviction relatively straightforward despite the delay in discovering the evidence. The resolution of Ashley's case provided closure for the Patterson family, though the knowledge of her suffering was difficult to accept. Robert and Linda Patterson attended Walsh's trial and sentencing, stating that while justice had been served, nothing could restore the daughter and future that had been stolen from them. The case became a landmark in the use of video evidence in criminal investigations, demonstrating both the potential value and the disturbing nature of recorded documentation of violent crimes. The footage had provided investigators with precise information about the crime, but had also created lasting trauma for everyone who viewed it. Dr. Margaret Thornton was recognized for her crucial role in ensuring that the video evidence reached law enforcement and that Ashley's killer was brought to justice. However, she was also traumatized by viewing the footage and eventually discontinued her paranormal investigation activities. The Whitmore house was eventually demolished in 1998, with the property being converted to a small memorial park dedicated to Ashley's memory. The Patterson family had advocated for the demolition, believing that the building had become a symbol of tragedy rather than historical preservation. The Ashley Patterson Foundation continued its work supporting other families of missing persons and advocating for improved investigation procedures. The foundation had grown to become a regional resource for families dealing with similar tragedies and had influenced legislation related to missing persons cases. The case also highlighted the importance of anonymous tip systems and the courage required of individuals who possess information about crimes. Michael Walsh's decision to provide the video evidence had been essential to solving the case, despite the personal risks and emotional trauma involved. Ashley Patterson's story became a reminder that evil could hide behind familiar faces and that technology could serve both to document crimes and to ultimately bring criminals to justice. The Halloween night that had begun with innocent celebration had ended in tragedy, but the truth had finally emerged to ensure that Ashley's killer faced the consequences of his actions. The VHS tape that had appeared mysteriously on Dr. Thornton's doorstep had provided the key to solving one of Pennsylvania's most disturbing missing persons cases. While the investigation had taken over a year to reach its conclusion, the persistence of law enforcement and the courage of those who came forward with evidence had ultimately ensured that justice was served. Ashley's memory lived on through the foundation established in her name and through the enhanced safety measures that had been implemented to protect other teenagers from similar predators. Her story served as both a warning about the dangers that could lurk in familiar places and an affirmation that the truth would eventually emerge, even from the darkest circumstances.